Hello everyone, welcome to Social Psychology, Psychology 346, and today we are going to be talking about social perception and social attributions. So, when we perceive another person, which we do on a regular basis, how do we form impressions or make inferences about other people and their behavior? Well, we do this. We try and make assumptions about a person's personality, about their traits, emotions, intentions, etc. How exactly do we do this? Well, when we see another person, we generally immediately rate them on two separate dimensions. That's on warmth and competence. So when we talk about warmth, we think, all right, how positive or negative do I feel towards this person? Or maybe, what do I perceive to be the person's intentions? Or does this person have good intentions, or do they have bad intentions? When we think about competence, we're judging how adequate or competent that person is. So can the person actually carry out the intentions, be they good or evil, that they might have? And each person can differ on both warmth and on competence. So once we make that assessment, we then try to form an impression about someone. And we can focus on two different aspects of a person to form these impressions. We can either focus on their appearance, so how they look, what does their appearance say about who they are, and then their behaviors. What are they doing? What does that say about who they are as a person? And we use both of this information to form a trait inference, which then leads to us forming a general impression about someone. So let's first focus on appearance. How do we use a person's appearance to form impressions about them? Well, first, people who are more attractive are perceived as good. So we see that individuals who are more attractive tend to be seen as more socially desirable, they tend to have better and more successful jobs, and they tend to marry more often. So this is important information to consider because hiring and firing decisions are made using appearance, promotion, punishment decisions are made, jury judgments and simulated trials are affected by the attractiveness of the person on trial. The attractiveness of a political candidate can also influence voter bias. So we tend to be biased towards people who are more attractive. There are some downsides to being attractive. These individuals are sometimes seen as more selfish, so they don't help out other people as much as people think they should. But generally, we see a lot of benefits given to people who are attractive. And surprisingly enough, we tend to see pretty good agreement on who is and who is not attractive. So what is it that makes people attractive? And especially, what is it that makes faces attractive? Well, we tend to see that faces that are more average tend to be more attractive. So an average looking face looks more attractive. And we also see that faces that are averaged, so faces that maybe through computer software are combined, also tend to be rated as more attractive. So faces that are average are more attractive. Faces that are symmetrical are also more attractive. So rather than a person's actual face, if it's cut in half and then mirrored, we see that those faces are actually rated as more attractive than their real life faces. There are certain qualities that elicit certain traits or characteristics of people. So individuals who have larger lips, smaller nose, larger forehead, smaller chin, and larger eyes, these are baby face qualities. They tend to be associated with traits such as honesty, being warm, kind, caring, some negative traits such as being naive, weak, or submissive. Alternatively, we can see other facial traits such as a pronounced or angular jaw, more hyper-masculine traits as they're labeled, tend to be associated with other traits such as being strong, competent, or dominant. So what about behaviors? Well, we can focus on specific behaviors and make certain inferences or impressions of people based on how they behave. This is through attribution theory. We generally try to understand the reasons for people's behaviors, and then through those reasons make judgments about who they are as a person. So oftentimes we'll make a causal judgment about why an event occurred. We try to answer the question of why a person did what they did, not necessarily how. And we can distinguish attributions into camps. We can have internal attributions, so that is explaining a person's behavior in terms of their personality traits, or external attributions, that's explaining a person's behavior as influenced by their environment. And humans generally gravitate towards one of these attributions over the other. We tend to make relatively biased attributions. Specifically, we commit what's known as the fundamental attribution error. That is, we tend to explain others' behaviors in terms of dispositions rather than environmental or situational constraints. So we think that people are behaving in a specific way because of who they are, not because this is the only way that they could behave given the situation. And we tend to a certain extent, explain our own behaviors in the exact opposite way. But it's a little bit more nuanced. So if we do something good, then we use internal attributions. Well, that's because we're awesome. But if we do something bad, we are able to suggest that maybe the situation had a hand in it. So if I trip over something, it's not because I'm clumsy, it's because this stupid chair was in the way because of the situation. This occurs because, especially in our kind of Western culture, people stand out more than the situation does. So we tend to focus on, when we're looking at a given environment or situation, we tend to focus on interactions between people rather than the larger environment or situation as a whole. So obviously we're going to focus on dispositions or personality traits of behaviors rather than how the situation is influencing. And even when we're aware of situational constraints, we tend to disregard them. We tend to focus in on the personality because that's kind of the easiest way of explaining the situation. So how can we overcome some of these errors? Well, if we remember back to the dual process model, where we perceive something, we have an automatic reaction, and then we have this kind of final reaction. As long as we have the motivation and capacity to kind of think more explicitly or think more consciously about a situation, we can then have a larger impact on how we actually react in the situation. So we may automatically gravitate towards dispositional inferences or internal attributions for behaviors, but as long as we're aware that this is a bias and we're motivated to think more accurately about any given situation, we can then consider the situation and form a more accurate impression of our surroundings. Another way we form impressions of other people through their behavior is through nonverbals. So this could be nonverbal emotions, expressions, gestures, etc., etc. These are behaviors that are relatively automatic and are difficult to control, but communicate a lot of information to us. And we oftentimes, as individuals trying to interact with another person, use these nonverbal behaviors or forms of communication to decide how to behave around people. We can often use these to figure out a person's intentions or maybe how they feel about other people. So we do see some cultural differences in terms of nonverbal behaviors. So, for example, people in Western cultures are more likely to use direct eye gaze or eye contact compared to other cultures. We see differences in terms of personal distance or specific postures used to, for example, greet other people. And along with cultural differences, we also see gender differences. We see that females are more likely to express nonverbal emotions or gestures, and females are also better at accurately decoding nonverbal emotions or expressions. And this is a little bit in part due to the fact that women, at least socially here within Western cultures, it's more socially acceptable and encouraged for women to express their emotions or experience emotions. So they're more familiar with them, and that way they're more familiar with emotional expressions and being able to accurately pinpoint what another person is experiencing in terms of emotion. Even though women do tend to be more accurate at perceiving and decoding other people's nonverbals, we as humans generally tend to be extremely accurate at forming accurate impressions of people just by watching small, short snippets of a person's behavior. So this is done through thin slicing. So for example, watching just a short 6-second video clip of a professor on their first day of school, participants were able to relatively accurately predict their end of the semester or end of the quarter student evaluations. And simply by looking at photographs of CEOs of different companies, people were able to identify how successful they were relatively accurately. Another interesting thing that we see with nonverbal behaviors is what's known as nonverbal and sometimes verbal mimicry. That is, So for example, with verbal mimicry, we tend to imitate or mimic another person's accent, volume, tone of voice, for example. And in terms of nonverbal mimicry, we mimic or impersonate their specific postures or movements. This often creates smooth social interactions. We mimic people that we like, and then they mimic us back, and that increases the social connection. And it also increases similarity. We obviously feel more similar to people who are doing the same things that we are also doing. Along with nonverbal mimicry, in order to, feel similar to others, we can also do what's known as self-presentation. We can attempt to control the impressions that others have of us. We can make it seem that we are who we want to be, not necessarily who we actually are. And everyone does this, especially high self-monitors, people who are more aware of their surroundings and more cognizant of how other people are perceiving them. We self-present because we want to appear likable. We want to be liked by others. That can help us in life. We self-present because we want to appear competent. We want people to think that we know what we're doing. And we self-present to appear powerful. It's a way of kind of conveying higher status to other people. And that way they not only like us more, but will kind of do what we say more often. This is, again, a way of controlling the impressions that others have of us, but it can sometimes backfire, especially if these behaviors that we're enacting due to self-presentation can lead to health issues. So if we tan to make it look like we're in the sun a lot more, that can lead to skin cancer. If we smoke to look cool and make others like us more, that can lead to lung cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And some people are better at calling us out on these different ways of self-presenting, on when we lie. Generally, as a population, we have what's known as a truth bias. We tend to just believe that people are telling the truth. We don't feel like we need to exert a lot of energy to try and see whether or not a person is lying. And for this reason, we are not great at detecting lies. On average, a person has about a 54% success rate. Some people who are trained to be better at detecting lies, such as TSA agents, therapists, CIA, they do have better rates of lie detection, but still nowhere near 100%. Why can't we detect liars? Well, for the most part, we are focusing on the cues or signals that are controllable, such as facial expressions or such as the content of the lie itself, rather than focusing on more diagnostic signals, such as tone of voice, such as pauses or errors in speech, maybe repeating themselves, or having fewer illustrations, such as kind of using your hands to speak. We also focus on some invalid markers of liars, such as eye contact. Research really hasn't found any links between the appearance or reluctance in eye contact and whether or not a person is lying. So taking social perception as a whole, we tend to use a person's appearance as a cue for forming an impression. So for example, the beauty is good cue or heuristic. We use individuals' behaviors as cues for forming impressions. So for example, the fundamental attribution error, we sometimes have biases in how we perceive behaviors. And we also try and modify how other people perceive us, again, through these different self-presentational techniques. So thank you again for your time and attention. That's all we have today. I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.